What's up, everybody? Welcome to the High Level Husband Podcast. I'm Tommy McAllister. I'm doing a quick one today. I'm going to come in here and just give you some practical and tactical steps on how to become a high level husband, a high level man, a son of God, and how to be better at those areas. And I was in a Bible study last night and a verse really jumped out at me and God was just speaking through me. And I was like, I need to come on here and I need to teach this to you guys because it's so true on what's either growing our marriage or killing our marriage, what's growing us as individuals or killing us as individuals, what's growing our friendships or not. Like everything has this cause and effect, right? I was talking with a friend this last weekend and he was just shared a great piece of knowledge. Eventually might get him on the podcast. But he was saying every choice that we make throughout the day is either advancing God's kingdom or advancing the devil's kingdom. And this is 100% true in our marriage. It's either advancing the marriage or not advancing it, or advancing as a kingdom marriage or advancing it as a devil marriage. And that's just the truth. And so I'm going to touch on this verse and I'm going to break it down with the practical and tactical steps. And so it's John 3 and the verse is 6. It says, flesh gives birth to flesh, but the spirit gives birth to spirit. So when something gives birth, it's multiplying, right? It's reproducing, it's growing. So if you have kids, you're growing your family. And so flesh, I'll start with flesh, right? So that would be the negative, that would be the bad, that would be the devil, right? And the spirit would be God. So the flesh makes our decisions in a lot of different ways and we give in. But the things of the flesh in Galatians 5 says that the things of the flesh will never satisfy, the desires of the flesh will never satisfy the desires of the spirit. And the desires of the spirit will never satisfy the desires of the flesh. That's like shows you how different they are. But the flesh is this. If we're watching porn, if we're drinking alcohol, if we're eating a bunch of food, or we're watching binge watching TV or social media, we're hanging out with negative friends, or whatever negative thing that we're doing, we're cussing and all this other stuff. If we're just of this world, we're doing fleshly things. We're checking out Instagram models on our phone, or we're checking out the chicks at the gym. That's fleshly stuff. And so when you do those, they give birth to more of those things. That's why the Bible says, it says lust is the same thing as adultery and anger is the same thing as murder. Why? How can that be? Because it leads to it. And so your flesh, as it's doing these things, will give birth to more of those things in the next, and the next, and the next. I'm going to give you a quick little story on this. So I lead men's masterminds, people flying from all over the country. And I'm going to honor this man because this is real vulnerability. And this is what shows you how strong of a man is. And let me ask you, do you think, excuse my French here, but that you would have the balls to share this in front of a bunch of other men who are strangers? And it's going to show you exactly how lust leads to adultery, but also flesh gives birth to more flesh. And do you think what that is doing? Is it advancing God's kingdom or is it ruining it, right? Is this ruining his marriage? Check this out. So he was getting vulnerable and he was sharing and he starts tearing up and he says, I've been cheating on my wife. Oh, that's not much of a shocker these days, right? But he says, not only have I been cheating on my wife, I've been cheating on my wife with another man. And we're like, our jaw drops. This is like a manly type man, military guy, like just somebody was military, somebody you just would look at him and you'd be like, no way this dude's hooking up with other dudes. Well, he wasn't continuously sleeping with other men, but he had. And I was like, mind blown. I'm like, man, I would have never guessed that. I love this guy more after he tells me because of his vulnerability and his realness. And I know what the flesh gives birth to the flesh. But he said, here's the crazy thing. I'm not gay. He wouldn't tell us this stuff if he's not gay. Like, he's not trying to soften the blow. He wouldn't just tell us. If he was actually gay and he was ashamed of it, he wouldn't tell us all this. He's like, it's crazy. He says it started off with me, doing most men's stuff, watching porn, checking out chicks, drinking alcohol, doing all the things of this world. And that just kept to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. He said, so, of course, I'm watching porn online, masturbating quite a bit. He says, then watching one type. And I watch a little bit more kinkier. And I watch even more kinkier. And it's girl on girl. Then it's like guy on guy. And then it's like keeps evolving, he says. And then he says, and then I cheated my wife with, I believe he said a woman first. So I believe he said that, but was relevant to the story. And then he says, I was out drinking one night and things started happening, and I've been watching this porn, and the next thing you know, like this guy, and we're talking, we're drunk, and this thing you know, I ended up hooking up with a dude. And I know when you're thinking this, you're thinking, I don't care how drunk I am, how much porn I've watched, it won't happen. I've been in this business and I've done life long enough now, guys, where this is all I do all day is spiritual warfare, leading men. You'll be surprised on what you see. You'll be surprised what depression will lead you to. PTSD will lead you to. All this other stuff will lead you to. What flesh giving birth to flesh will lead you to. So he says, I do that. And it just all just compounded, which then showed exactly why that verse is so true. That flesh gives birth to flesh, but then lust leads to adultery. But the anger leads to murder, because nobody just like is this happy, peaceful, joyful dude's never really been angry in your life. And all of a sudden, one time you get angry, you stab somebody 18 times. That doesn't happen. That does not happen. It's the slow process. Nobody just robs a bank first time. They started by doing other little sins, and it gave birth to other sins. Flesh giving birth to flesh. And so when your marriage, you're wondering how it got here. Well, in the beginning, marriage is good and all these other things. And then it's like, you start having kids, and then these distractions come in, and the kids are expensive. And so your wife's putting the kids first, and you're working more to pay for them, and all these other distractions come in. Now the resentment's building, and then the frustration's building. And then now you're not having as much sex with your wife. And so you're watching porn, and you're doing this. The next thing you know, all these things start bleeding. Well, then you're not super stoked on the porn that you're watching because you feel shamed. But then so you're having a beer, and one beer is starting to turn to 2 a night, then 3 a night. And then 2 times a week you're getting drunk, and all these other things. It just gives birth to more flesh. Well, then you're ruining your life. And then you're wondering why you're unfulfilled, why you're not peaceful, why you're joyful, why your marriage is not growing, why even though you're going to a counselor and you're trying to fix all this stuff, but it's not growing. It's because the flesh is still giving birth to more flesh. It's multiplying. It's a compound interest effect. That's how it works. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And to keep touching on this before I go to the spirit was, I've been in that spot. It's why they call it a gateway drug. You start with a cigarette, you start with a beer, then you smoke weed, then you do a little bit of blow, then you do some ecstasy, then you do some pain pills, and then you're doing harder pain pills, then you're snorting the pain pills, then you start doing heroin. It's like literally that's how it goes. I've watched it happen. Thankfully, I stopped right before heroin. God saved my life and saved me, thankfully. But I watched all the rest of the people I was doing life with go to heroin. It's the same thing in all these other aspects in just different ways. It's even in money, right? You make $100,000 a year, then you're like, I'm trying to make 200. You make 200. Next thing you know, you're like, well, this is good, but I need to make 400. And then your lifestyle keeps up with that, because then you're trying to keep up with the Joneses. You need to make 400 a year. Then now you're stressed if you're not, because you've built this lifestyle. Then it's like, okay, well, I better get to $1 million a year. Then you do, and then you keep your lifestyle up. It keeps breeding more and more and more and more flesh, which doesn't satisfy them unless you guys know that right now. Well, then it's ruining all those aspects of your life. But then there's spirit, and I'm going to get how to do both these things. But spirit gives birth to spirit. Well, as you're focusing more on the spirit, it's going to multiply effect as well. What's going to happen is you're going to start just hearing a verse. You're going to start going to church. If you really keep focusing, that verse will turn to more verses. You'll start reading a chapter a day. You might start reading more a day. Your 30-second lukewarm prayers eventually going to turn to longer and longer prayers, more passionate prayers. You're going to be at church, but then you're going to start knowing the songs more. And then now you're not listening to secular music anymore. You're listening to more worship music. Now you can't even hear the secular music because the worship music is just filling you up so much, and the other one's just like convicting you. Then you start having more friends, and you're starting to be in circles where more of those friends are there. So it's giving birth to more spirit. Well, then now as you're into God more and more, and you're just spending more time with them and have more friends, he's giving you more vision. And then you're starting to act and be obedient on those things, and more doors start opening. So whatever you focus on, if you focus more on this, all on the spirit, it will multiply. If you focus on the flesh, it will multiply. You can't really do both at the same time, or it's this back and forth process, and you're basically living on a roller coaster, and you're wondering why your life's stuck. You're wondering why you're at a midlife crisis. You wonder why your life's lukewarm. You wonder why your marriage sucks. Jesus said, if you're lukewarm, I'll spit you out, because that's what it is. It's pull of the flesh and it's pull of the spirit, and you're just trying to do both, and you're stuck in the middle. Well, that's tiring. You're playing tug of war. But what if on the other end, nobody was pulling, because you're just pulling the spirit the whole time? But if you're trying to do both, you can't grow. You cannot grow by doing both at the exact same time. You got to go all in. You got to go all in on the spirit. I've watched this happen in my life, guys. I'm telling you this. And I don't say this as bragging or anything like this. I'm just so excited about what's happening in our life. I'm so excited despite what's happening in our kids' life, our marriage, our ministry, and then there's all the people that we work with, what's happening in their lives. I'm so excited, and what I've seen, I'll never be able to unsee. So that's why I'm only pulling the spirit. But when I was on the other side, only pulling the flesh, I was getting more and more turmoil, even though I was getting, more money or more women or more things. It didn't matter. I was having kinkier and kinkier sex. And even in our marriage, before we were really a kingdom couple, we needed to always be having kinkier sex. We needed to push the limits with each other in the bed. And then you needed to keep doing that. And it was unfulfilling, because eventually you run out of things to do. Now we have more sex than ever, more passionate sex than ever. It's only getting better and better, more bonding. But we're not pushing the limits. We don't even desire to push the limits. It's just the two of us growing in the spirit, that the sex is of the spirit and not of the flesh. And it starts becoming special because of that. Probably should do a whole podcast on that. It becomes really, really special because of that. But that's how you have intimacy that keeps growing, because if you're of the flesh and your wife's trying to be of the spirit, now you're playing tug of war with each other. You're wanting to get kinkier and she's not. And then now you're getting resentment on that. Well, then you're not in the spirit and she is. And so it's not this bonding thing like she's searching for, and it's just not emotional for her. It's no emotional intimacy. It's just fleshly sex. After a while, it's just endless, and it just doesn't go well. That's why she'll pull back if she's somebody of the spirit. Now, even if that is like, it gets too far of when it's flesh. If they're one or both are the flesh, it just goes too far. It gives birth, right? So how do we do this? You need to remove all the flesh things from your life. You need to stop watching porn. You need to stop drinking alcohol. You need to stop stuffing your face full of food. You need to stop hanging out with people who do those things. You stop consuming a ton of sports and social media and all these other things and talk radio and all of that, because that's fleshly stuff that will lead you astray. You're like, well, then how am I supposed to enjoy life? I promise you, that's what we all thought. But guys, as the spirit is giving more birth to the spirit, I'm finding more fulfillment than I've ever found, more peace, more joy, more happiness. I'm watching crazy, insane things where I'm like, I can't believe this is my life. I can't believe this is my life. I can't believe this is my life. And I do none of that other stuff. I want you guys to take this. This is not a flex. I want to use an example. When we started this ministry, technically 5 years ago was when like the very first things started happening. But I would say it was really more of 4.5 years ago. We sold our second car to be able to invest into coaching, because we had just moved to Vegas, 2 mortgages, 2 kids, and no income in the height of COVID, August of 2020, because God called us here. It's a long story. I'll have to do a podcast on that sometime, but it's crazy. And when we got here, God had told us he had wanted us to do something. We didn't know 100% what it was. We thought it was coaching and fitness and nutrition, but what he ended up wanting us to do was start this ministry. But we needed capital to invest into coaching because we had no idea how to do it. We sold our second car. For a family of 4, we had 1 car. And up until a week ago, we still had 1 car. Now, in these past couple of years, we had the finances to be able to buy a second car, but we're always like, man, we don't really need it. Like, we pretty much have figured out how to work around it. So let's just kind of do this. And we took all of our extra money and invested into more personal development coaching to grow ourselves to grow us in the spirit, to give birth to more spirit. We tithed a lot more. We gave to ministries more. We reinvested into the business of ours more and more and more. And we still just had one car. We live very simple. Like, guys, like, I live a simple life. I wear black shirts every time, right? Like, the chain around my neck, it's a $6 chain. Like, I wear $15 TikTok shoes. Like, I'm a pretty simple dude. But I always said, if I'm going to get a second car, I'm going to get a sports car. I've never really been much of a car guy until we moved to Vegas. Well, technically we live in Henderson, and there's just nice cars everywhere. And they've started to rub off on me where I was like, man, that's a good looking car. And so I've held out for a long time because I was worried about my flesh wanting a nice car for fleshly reasons. But as the spirit kept giving birth to more spirit and more spirit and more spirit, I didn't need a car. There's been more times we've kind of needed one recently and just those things. And I was like, you know what? Our finances are totally in a spot where we can easily get a second car. And I don't want to say pretty much any car we want, but I don't want to say, because there's a lot of really, really, really expensive cars, but to a certain extent, right? And we were like, all right, well, maybe we'll do it. But I was nervous because I didn't want my flesh to be like, this is a fleshly thing. I got the car last week, super nice sports car, fun to drive. And I woke up the next day, and all I did that day was ministry, and I had forgot I had got the car. And it was a great moment to me where I was like, oh, yeah, no big deal. I drove it a couple of times this week, but then I was even like, I could sell this car and not even be worried about it. And that was a good moment for me, like where it didn't even matter. It didn't change my life. And I have a dope car sitting in my garage. It didn't change my life one bit. So my point is, like, the spirit will satisfy, the flesh won't. I've had it. My testimony was where I wanted to jump off the roof of my house every day, and I had unlimited free time, unlimited money, a beautiful wife, 2 healthy kids, and a house, and trips around the world, and I hated my life. Not because I was a drug addict or anything like that at that time. It's because I had no purpose, because I had no spirit. I had experienced the spirit earlier on, but then I gave way to my flesh. And because of that, the flesh started multiplying again. So guys, you have to remove these things, and don't ever think that, well, then I'm not supposed to join things. Did I watch the Super Bowl? Yeah, about 3/4 of it. I mean, obviously, it wasn't a very good game this year, but I watched about 3/4 of it. I'm a Bills fan. I watched every single Bills game this year. That was the only game pretty much I watched on the weekend. I'd watch the Bills game and I record it, so I fast forward through the flags and things like that, and that's all I watch. Don't watch any other sports. I used to be a giant MMA fan. I used to get every pay-per-view. When I moved here, God called me to remove all of that from my life. And because of that, I filled my life with God, and now the spirit multiplied. But when the Bills lost in the playoffs this year, I was over it in 5 minutes, even though I watched all the games this year of the Bills, because what it was is, like, it doesn't matter to me because the spirit is so much more impactful. So remove, guys, these things of the flesh from your life. If you don't, they will compound and they will get worse. I promise you, if you think you have them under control, they will get worse. I've done this long enough with enough men and enough successful worldly guys as well. It compounds to getting worse. It always does. The same destination always happens unless you get into the spirit and give birth to spirit. And so what I'm saying about that is, how do you do that? Well, first you have to remove, because you can't grow the spirit until you remove that. Guys, increase. Be in the word every day. Get in a men's group. Listen to a podcast like this or any other faith-based men's leadership. Get into some type of coaching. Maybe this might, maybe somebody else's. Be around faith, strong men. My community started changing when I invested into programs that got me around other high-level men. Now, if you don't have the finances for that, I technically didn't. I sold my car, and that's what happened. But even at that, your church should have a men's group. If not, start it. That's what I have guys in my program do, start their men's group, and it's crazy what's happening in their life because of it. I promise you, you build it, people will come, and all of that. I probably should do a whole podcast on how to do that. Get into that. Sabbath once a week. Fast once a week. Tithe 10% or more. Do these things, but seek God wholeheartedly. Be in prayer and solitude for at least 20, 30 minutes a day. Now, never cease praying as you're doing your job and driving on the road. You should always be in communion with God, but like in your own specific solid time. But guys, spend that time in the word, and I promise you that's the hugest. 1 chapter a day. Go to church. But if you do those things, because you can't just go to church and call it good. Like, you have to do all of those things to really grow. You can't just eat once a week and think you're going to be nourished. If you want your spirit to give birth to spirit, you have to feed it every day. Just as a mom, when they're growing a baby, they have to eat extra to give birth to the baby, right? They have to feed for two. Well, as you're giving birth to the spirit more and more, you have to consume more and more of God and do more things for God, right? And love on him more, love on his people more. And so it's really, really cool what happens. I just got done with our Bible study just a few minutes ago for our community of men, and we were studying in Matthew, and it's where Jesus tells the parable. He invites these people to the banquet, and a guy showed up not without his wedding banquet clothes on, and he got kicked out. And what it was that parable right is there and there. That point is saying is he thought it was doing good enough. It's where a lot of guys in life, I'm doing good enough. I'm a good person. Nothing in the Bible says if you're a good person, you go to heaven. There's not one verse about that. Zero. Zip. People think that's what gets them there. That's not. So I just want to encourage you, don't think you're doing good enough. Good enough leads to flesh, to flesh, to flesh. I promise you, because the devil's waiting to steal, kill, and destroy, which means he's waiting for you to take a moment off and be too good to be great, and he is going to squash you and ruin your life. I promise you. How many guys have come in and they've said, man, I have no idea how I got to this point. Or, man, I didn't know my marriage was this bad and my wife just cheated on me. Or I had no my marriage was this bad and my wife just filed for divorce. It's like, dude, you got complacent. You were good enough. Give spirit, give birth to that. So, guys, go all in for the Lord. Do all of that stuff. And so, I love y'all. Clean this up. Stop giving birth to flesh. Give birth to spirit and change your life. If you enjoy this, guys, keep tuning in. Rate it 5 stars. Or if you're on YouTube, please give us a subscribe and like this video. It means the world to us. If you're interested in coaching, click the link below. If you're not, keep listening to this podcast. Either way, God bless you. Wish you nothing but the best. Much love.